Hello, I'm Ryan, and welcome to Analyze This, Mr. Bond, my channel where I discuss the adventures of James Bond 007 and dig for what lies beneath the surface. Today, we're circling back to On Her Majesty's Secret Service because there's too much to say about that movie to fit it in one video. In my first video on Her Majesty's Secret Service, I took a look at what Lazenby brings to the role of James Bond and how that film tried to navigate the transition between Sean Connery and a new actor. Today, we're focusing on the rest of the characters in that film because I believe that On Her Majesty's Secret Service has the best ensemble of any James Bond film. I realize that's a big claim to make. Some of the Bond films have exceptionally great casts and such vivid characters. I mean, think of From Russia with Love. It's an embarrassment of riches in that regard. But the reason I think On Her Majesty's Secret Service is uniquely well calibrated is that all of the characters exist in a dramatic framework where they really feel like they have relationships to each other. And more importantly, relationships to James Bond, who is the center of this narrative. Nobody really just feels stranded on the periphery. Everybody kind of has a sort of lived-in energy. And perhaps that's because On Her Majesty's Secret Service is uniquely powered by a level of intimacy, maybe would be the right word, in its relationships. There's a uniquely intimate flair to so many of the scenes in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and that kind of reverberates out into the periphery with all these side characters kind of clustered around the core romance of Bond and Tracy. Indeed, there is no better place to start in discussing On Her Majesty's Secret Service's ensemble than to discuss Tracy. Tracy is, in my mind, indisputably the best of the Bond girls. Whether you want to call her a Bond girl or a Bond woman, it doesn't matter. She's a force of nature. This role was critically important in the 1960s. To give Bond a wife seemed bold, especially in the context of the 1960s, where Connery's Bond was such a cad. You know, he was a bit ruthless and brutal and not the most tender in his relationships with women. And you really had to find an actress who could bring a lot of strength to the role. And they found that in Diana Rigg. Diana Rigg was actually known to me before I ever saw On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Unusually for someone in my generation, I grew up watching episodes of the TV show The Avengers. It was something my grandmother would put on for me. She would get the video cassettes from her library, and we would watch some of the old episodes with John Steed and Emma Peel. And so I had a young boy's crush on Diana Rigg. And so by the time I saw On Her Majesty's Secret Service, it just seemed such a natural fit. And I have to imagine that's exactly how it seemed to audiences in the 1960s. If you were to choose an actress for the spouse of James Bond, how better a pick could you find than the actual, like, iconic female super spy of that era, Emma Peel? But Diana Rigg is also just a force to be reckoned with in her own right. She is an iconic, legendary actor, a performer of incredible gravitas. Even to her last performances, such as, her appearance on Game of Thrones, she just commands the screen. And she brings that forcefulness to the character of Tracy. If you've read the novel by Ian Fleming, and it's been a little while for me, so my memory of the novel is a little hazy, but Tracy's a pretty fragile character in that novel. The novel really goes into the elements in which psychologically she is quite fragile, very tender, very sensitive. Obviously, the story essentially kicks off with Tracy's attempt at suicide. And that is, the big opening incentive event of the film. In the book, the sequences of events is slightly different. But here, the opening inciting event of the story is Tracy attempting to drown herself in the sea. I think that potentially could create such a an a sense of psychological trouble for this character that it would be hard to truly understand the romance that follows. But I think Diana Rigg has inner strength that characterizes that in a new light. This is not just a character who is depressed, but this is a character who is almost existing in defiance of the world around her. This is a character at war with the world around her. So in this opening act of On Her Majesty's Secret Service, in which Bond saves her from drowning, and then Bond subsequently rescues her from dishonor at the casino when she, makes a risky bet looking for trouble. She has such inner strength through those scenes that it doesn't feel like she's totally lost control of her life. She's a character who just so resents the world around her that her acting out in this way, her behaving recklessly, her attempting to throw away her life is almost an act of her own firm defiance of the challenges of life. And you really see that in the way her relationship with Lazenby's Bond develops. There's a slight antagonism between them at the start of their relationship, but also a mutual fascination. And because of the nature of their relationship, and in part maybe just because George Lazenby is not quite as strong an actor as Diana Rigg, when they have scenes together, she's really holding her own. There's no sense in which one is yielding to the other. They really feel like equals matched from the very start, from the very first time they appear on screen together to all of their subsequent interactions. It's so interesting to watch their arc throughout the movie as they proceed from this period of mistrust and exploration and fall deeply in love to the point where they agree to get married. And I think the scene between Diana Rigg and George Lazenby in the barn when Bond proposes is one of the most exceptionally beautiful scenes in any Bond movie, not just because of how well it's shot, and it is shot exceptionally well. As with much of this film, it's directed spectacularly well, and I need to do a video just on what makes a good Bond director to talk a little bit more about Peter Hunt's incredible handling of scenes like that. But that scene is wonderful because both George Lazenby and Diana Rigg get equal time to hold that scene. And we see the way Bond is processing that moment and the way it kind of comes upon Bond all of a sudden that this girl is the love of his life. And we similarly see in her the sense that she's really desperately wanting what Bond is about to offer her, but she's too afraid to yield to it, to admit it, to showcase her own vulnerability. There's a sense in which Tracy has been so mistreated by life that she has this sort of wall up that only really comes down with Bond because Bond himself embodies strength. And together they kind of give each other strength. I think Tracy is a uniquely well-characterized Bond girl because she really does a lot of active stuff in the back half of this movie. She rescues Bond. She drives throughout the bulk of the car chase. She's even an active participant in the climax where she's assisting in her own escape, fighting with the villains. There's no sense in which she feels like a passive character in this story, and that's both how she's written and also how Diana Rigg plays her. I mean, Diana Rigg is just a tower of strength. And I can't say enough about how well she comes off in this movie, how strong that character feels, how much I feel she really anchors everything about this movie because this movie doesn't work without her in it. But she's surrounded by other great supporting characters. One of the great actors in this movie is Gabriel Ferzetti as Marc-Ange Draco, her father. Draco's an interesting character because he's a gangster. Bond's father-in-law is a gangster. He's a criminal. He's very patriarchal, very misogynistic, very given to his typical methodology of working in the world, which is to just kind of buy his way through life. He's a wheeler and dealer in the underworld, and you kind of get that sense that that's how he operates in all spheres. But he's complex because he really does love his daughter, Tracy. He just is incapable of being the father she needs, and that's partially why their relationship is so fraught. They both love each other very much, but there's this sense in which neither one is able to meet the other one where they're at. And you really get such a lovely sense for that relationship in one of my favorite scenes in the entire Bond series, which is when Draco and Bond meet for the first time. And the movie just slows down for a bit to let Draco explain his life story, his relationship to Tracy, and allow it to unfold in this beautiful monologue accompanied by John Barry's breathtaking score. You know, we have All the Time in the World just kind of swelling in the background very gently as he tells a somewhat romantic and sad story of falling in love, having Tracy, losing his wife, Tracy kind of falling to pieces as she, goes through her own life, and his desire that Bond might be able to rescue her in some way. And it's a very patriarchal dad's take on Tracy and her relationship. But Bond at this time is still being fairly mercenary in his motivations. He's more interested in getting to Blofeld than he is in Tracy at this point in the story. And you see Bond kind of navigating that same negotiation at the same time. And it's kind of interesting to see both of them connect. They both exist in a similar world, and you kind of get the movie's nod to that during Bond's wedding, where M and Draco connect, and they kind of are able to commiserate together, because all of these characters exist in the shadow of the underworld. Spies exist in the underworld, criminals exist in the underworld, and Bond and Tracy's romance unfolds within this shadow. And Fetti is such a tremendous actor. He's in one of my all-time favorite movies, Once Upon a Time in the West. He's magnificent in that, just as he's magnificent here. He's one of those actors who just immediately appears on screen and just exudes maturity and gravitas. And for my money, he's the best of this archetype that occurs throughout the series. The Karen Bay archetype of this older mentor-like figure for Bond, a slight father figure who assists Bond in his mission. Draco is the best of those because he has the most intimate relationship with Bond, the most intimate relationship with the Bond girl, and it's a very satisfying arc that he has over the course of the movie. I mean, again, he's right there in the climax alongside Bond, helping him rescue Tracy from Blofeld. It's a really great relationship, and he gets moments of his own. He's a very funny character. I love the bits in the helicopter where he's kind of bluffing his way into restricted airspace, so to speak, and doing so with such humor. I mean, he so nicely conveys the generalized humor of a guy who has been doing essentially con jobs his entire life, and the way he brings that into assisting Bond in the final mission is just so lovely. So you have a terrific Bond girl, you have a terrific ally, and then what about the villains? Well, I think the villains here are, again, exceptionally great. You have Telly Savalas as Blofeld, and Telly Savalas is not my necessarily sentimental favorite Blofeld. I am actually partial to Donald Pleasance in this role because just of the sort of like mythic, weird, nightmarish energy that Donald Pleasance's Blofeld has works really well for me. I love Donald Pleasance in general. There's a sort of just slightly uncanny feeling about him. I don't think Telly Savalas conveys that sort of larger than life energy in the same way. But he works so well as a foil to George Lazenby's Bond because Telly Savalas is a actor that, projects a lot of ego. And Blofeld in this story is a character who is almost devoured by his own arrogance, right? Everything Blofeld is doing in this story is just out of arrogance. He is a scientist who is going to great lengths to perfect a frankly absurd scheme to get this title that he doesn't really deserve. He's a fraud who just wants to be recognized as one of the world's elite. And that sort of peculiar snobbery, that sort of aspiration to respectability works with Telly Savalas' Blofeld. And he's also not just an intellectual threat, which he is. In every scene he has with Bond, there's just a sense of Blofeld having a keen mind, having outsmarted Bond in many ways. He's a physical threat. He's able to chase Bond in the great action sequences. He's able to go mano a mano with Bond in the bobsled climax of the film. It's such a great feeling when Bond gets a foe that really is pushing him to his limits. And you get the sense that that's the case in On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Bond is really on his back feet a little bit when it comes to Blofeld in this movie, and really only escapes by the luck of the draw, as is often the case with Bond. But in this case, it feels like there are quite a few moments where, Blofeld really might have won the day here. And I don't know. Telly Savalas has such incredible presence and energy. It is a shame they didn't get to rematch together in a sequel because a really dark revenge-focused story in the vein of Ian Fleming's You Only Live Twice with Bond hunting down Telly Savalas' Blofeld would have been really, really exciting. It builds such a strong foundation for their relationship here. They really feel like they have a personal rivalry in the way that wasn't the case in You Only Live Twice, where Sean Connery meets Blofeld for the first time. There's no real intimacy in that relationship, but Bond's relationship with Blofeld here feels like it gets really personal really quickly, and I feel like that could have really catapulted to greater heights had they been able to continue in these roles together. And Blofeld himself has one of the series' great hench people in Irma Bunt. Irma Bunt is kind of a variation on the Rosa Klebb template, this sort of sinister matronly figure that is in many ways like Bond's primary antagonist for a lot of his adventure here. I mean, Irma Bunt is the one who's hunting Bond down as he's hiding in the ski slopes, and is the one kind of policing him and prodding him as he's navigating the dynamics of Piz Gloria. She's just a very predatory, sinister figure from the first time we meet her. And again, Bond has this very interesting give and take relationship with Irma Bunt, where he's trying to get the better of her verbally, but you also get the sense that he's in danger when he's around Irma Bunt. Irma Bunt seems like a character who has a very dark, nasty, cruel side. And again, it's a shame that she didn't get to reappear in a follow-up. I think it would have been just such a tremendous opportunity to see Lazenby's Bond face off against Blofeld and Irma Bunt again. But we got what we got. And thankfully, the movie is very good. To round out this discussion of the film's ensemble, I think we have to talk about what it does for the MI6 family. Certainly in recent years, with the Daniel Craig films, there's this sort of emphasis of MI6 being this sort of like tight-knit family dynamic. That's not necessarily how it's always the case in the Roger Moore and Sean Connery era. You certainly get the sense that they might just be more office relationships at times. But this movie definitely moves into that space where, again, the MI6 relationships are a little bit more intimate, but without some of the strained dramatic gestures that you get in something like the Daniel Craig era where everything is signposted. You get such a wonderful sense of M's affection for Bond and their kind of prickly relationship in this movie where Bond, upon, being called back to duty with M and being pulled off of Operation Bedlam, tries to resign from the service. And you get this wonderful dynamic between Bond, Moneypenny, and M, where Moneypenny goes out of her way to kind of scheme with M to keep Bond in the service. It's such a nice, effortless way of communicating how these characters actually feel about each other without any of them having to go on a grand speech or explicitly state, oh, I have a lot of care for Bond or anything to that regard. It just in the characters' actions and in their subtle interactions with one another, the lines they share back and forth, you get that sense together. And again, this is also the movie where Bond shows up at M's home and talks to him there instead of the office when he's going to reveal his intentions to go hunt down Blofeld in Switzerland. And you, again, get that sort of intimacy there. You get that especially with Bond and Moneypenny. This movie has Moneypenny's best moment, which is during Bond's wedding. Bond tosses Moneypenny the hat. It's a gesture to, a trope that had unfolded over the Connery era, but is here just a brilliantly handled bit of almost fan service. The ending of On Her Majesty's Secret Service with Bond's wedding, there's a lot of sort of fan servicey bits sprinkled in with the MI6 family, so to speak, M, Q, and Moneypenny. But the moment with Moneypenny is the best of these little moments because it just feels so earned. And Lois Maxwell is so good in the way that she just handles that moment with kind of an effortless grace where the tears in her eyes are so apparent. Her feelings about Bond have never been clearer than in that moment. But it's also a moment the movie moves past so quickly, just giving Bond and Moneypenny the briefest of moments to connect, acknowledge one another, and then Bond is off with the love of his life, Tracy. And I'll give the nod to Q here. Q doesn't get the most robust material in this movie, but again, his relationship with Bond is well intact here, as you would expect after the, many years of Bond ribbing him during the Connery era. So that moment where he kind of shows up at Bond's wedding as kind of more of a coworker who got the invite, you get the sense that Bond has a little bit more personal affection for M and Moneypenny, and then offers his support to Bond. And then Bond replies with a fairly crass one-liner in the George Lazenby way, is another amusing moment here. I do really appreciate the absolute absurdity and silliness of Q being introduced into the film with talking to M about radioactive lint. One of the things I do enjoy about On Her Majesty's Secret Service is that it somewhat encompasses this wide variety of tones and modes. It can be dramatic, it can be tense, it can be serious, it can be outrageously silly. It's no surprise that Austin Powers riffs off some of the elements in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, that it can kind of be the full spectrum of the entire James Bond experience in one movie. And you see that in the way that On Her Majesty's Secret Service flits in and out of some of the most absurd eye-rolling one-liners, and then can dip right into some of the most tender romantic scenes in the series, and then climax with the most bitter dramatic moment in the series. So I don't know how you feel about this cast of characters, but obviously I'm in love with it. Maybe I'm just blinded by my love for the movie overall. You guys can let me know in the comments whether I'm exaggerating how well this ensemble works together. But it really does feel to me like this is a movie built around character relationships in a way that the Bond films are often not. The Bond films are often built around set pieces, and then the story is just kind of like drawn on the back of a napkin, sort of connective tissue. And even the Ian Fleming novels don't feel particularly always very like narrative driven. Certainly there are more character moments in the Fleming novels than there have been in their film adaptations in many cases. But it's this sort of willingness to really lean into character dynamics as part of the momentum of the movie feels unique to On Her Majesty's Secret Service. And that gives this ensemble, in my opinion, a leg up over the competition. So thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.